The last thing Ethan Calloway remembered before the universe swallowed him whole was the smell of burnt coffee and the particular, irritating buzz of a malfunctioning capacitor. He was 32 years old, a structural engineer at Nova Labs in Austin, Texas, and he had absolutely no business touching the quantum resonance drive prototype. That was Dr. Obi Mensah's department. But Dr. Mensah had called in sick. The board presentation was in 6 hours, and Ethan had always been the kind of man who believed he could fix anything with enough coffee and stubbornness. He was wrong. The flash of light was the color of a scream. The sound was like reality tearing at its seams. And then, nothing. A long, cool, velvet nothing that lasted either 3 seconds or 3,000 years. He woke up on a stone floor the color of bruised amethyst, his cheek pressed against ground that hummed beneath him like a living thing. The air tasted metallic and sweet all at once, like copper dipped in honey. Above him stretched a ceiling so high it was lost in violet shadow, held up by columns carved with creatures Ethan had no words for. He sat up slowly. His head pounded. His shirt was singed at the collar. Around him stood soldiers. Not human soldiers. These beings stood nearly 7 feet tall, their skin a deep iridescent silver blue that shifted color with their movement, like the inside of an abalone shell. Their armor was organic-looking, curved plates of something that resembled bone grown into geometry. Each one held a weapon that glowed faintly at the tip, pointed directly at Ethan's chest. "Okay," Ethan said, very quietly. "Okay, this is fine." It was not fine. He was hauled upright by 2 soldiers, their grip surprisingly gentle despite the force behind it, and half-marched, half-carried through corridor after corridor of impossible architecture. Walls that breathed, floors that shifted their patterns underfoot, ceilings that opened onto glimpses of a sky the deep red of a dying ember. They brought him to a pair of doors that stood at least 40 feet tall, carved from something that looked like obsidian, but moved like water frozen mid-ripple. The doors opened without a sound. The throne room beyond stole the breath from his lungs. Thousands of beings filled tiered gallery rows that curved around a central floor of polished dark stone. The air was thick with a sound like low, resonant music, not played, but generated by the crowd itself, a vibration from their chests. Bioluminescent markings on their faces and arms pulsed in synchronized patterns. It was the most beautiful and terrifying thing Ethan had ever witnessed. At the far end, elevated on a dais of black crystal, sat the throne. And on the throne her. Even from a distance, she was extraordinary. Her skin was the deepest shade of midnight blue, and across her cheekbones and down her throat, golden bioluminescent lines traced patterns that pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat made visible. Her hair, if it could be called that, was a crown of dark tendrils that moved with a lazy, intelligent grace, as though each strand had its own quiet thoughts. She wore armor too, but hers was different, sleek dark, with edges that caught the light like the surface of black water disturbed by a single drop. Her eyes, when they landed on Ethan, were the color of a solar eclipse, dark at the center, ringed with molten gold. A translator device was affixed to Ethan's collar by one of the soldiers, and suddenly the deep resonant sound of the crowd had meaning, threading into language in his ear. The creature that materialized in the outer ring. A scout? A weapon? Execute it before. Ethan cleared his throat. The sound was absurdly human in this vast, cosmic space. Several soldiers flinched. She did not flinch. She simply watched him with those eclipse eyes, one hand resting on the arm of her throne with the absolute stillness of someone who had never once needed to prove they were dangerous. A figure in ceremonial robes stepped forward, an advisor of some kind, and began speaking in clipped, formal tones. The translator rendered it in Ethan's ear. "Creature of unknown origin, you stand before Empress Vera Salanthus, blood of the ancient line, flamekeeper of the Vorkai, undefeated queen of the Salanthi Empire. You will explain your presence, or you will not leave this room." Ethan's heart was doing something medically inadvisable. His hands were shaking. He had always handled fear by making jokes. His therapist had called it a maladaptive coping mechanism, and he had laughed at that too. The ceremony was mid-ritual. The music of the crowd rose and fell in waves. Tall candles of blue flame were being lit along the dais. There was something sacred and ancient happening around him, and Ethan was standing in the middle of it in a singed shirt, completely alone. He looked at the Empress. She was still watching him, and something about the way she watched, not with cruelty, not with boredom, but with a sharp, contained curiosity, like a scientist examining something unexpected under glass, made the joke rise in him before he could stop it. He straightened up. He gave his most formal bow, the kind his grandmother had made him practice before her country club dinners. "Well," he said, his voice only slightly unsteady, "this is quite a ceremony. Your Majesty," he gestured at the candles, the crowd, the grand occasion of it all. "Care for a dance?" The silence that followed was so complete that Ethan could hear his own blood moving. Every bioluminescent marking in the room went dark simultaneously. The blue candle flame stopped moving. The crowd of thousands became, in an instant, a single held breath. The advisor's ceremonial staff hit the floor with a sound like a gunshot. "He cannot have said," someone hissed in the gallery. "Seize him." "No!" One word, but it came from the throne. The Empress Vera rose from her seat. She was taller standing than Ethan had imagined. Her golden markings blazed to life, brighter than before, running up her throat and along her jaw like gilded fire. The crowd made a sound that the translator didn't have a word for, half gasp, half something reverent. She descended the dais steps one at a time, slowly, her eclipse eyes never leaving Ethan's face. She stopped 3 feet away from him. Up close, he could see that her bioluminescent markings were not symmetrical. They were individual, like fingerprints. He could see the faint rise and fall of her breath. He could see that she was, in some way he lacked the language to describe, the most compelling presence he had ever been near. "You," she said, and the translator made her voice low and precisely articulated in his ear, "have just issued the ancient marriage challenge before the full royal court." Ethan blinked. "I the what?" "An invitation to dance, made publicly to the reigning empress, is the oldest matrimonial ritual in Salanthi law. It may only be accepted or rejected in this moment, before witnesses." She tilted her head, those golden markings pulsing slowly. "You were making a joke." "I was terrified," Ethan said, which was the truest thing he'd said in years. A pause. Something moved behind her eyes that he couldn't read yet. He would spend months learning to read it. "I know," she said. And then softly, in a register that the translator almost missed, "I accept." The music began. It rose from the crowd itself. That chest-deep resonance Ethan had noticed before, now structured into something deliberate and measured. A rhythm with the weight of centuries behind it. The blue candles blazed back to life, all at once. Ethan did not know how to do an alien wedding dance. He barely remembered the waltz steps his grandmother had made him learn. But Vera moved toward him with a kind of unhurried certainty that made panic feel temporary. And when she placed her hand, warm forefingered, the golden lines on her wrist pulsing against his skin. In his body seemed to remember something before his mind did. "Follow," she said quietly. He followed. She led with her whole body, an economy of motion that turned out to be its own kind of communication. He learned her in 3 minutes of movement. The slight pressure of her fingers that meant turn, the barely there tension in her arm that meant slow. She was patient with his stumbles, patient in the way of someone who had never needed to be patient before, and was choosing it deliberately. "You're not afraid now," she said, not quite a question. "Oh, I'm still afraid," Ethan told her. "I'm just also, this is going to sound insane, I'm also kind of fascinated. Something happened at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. Preliminary to one. Fascinated, she repeated, tasting the word. You're the most, he stopped himself, because the honest completion of that sentence was overwhelming, and he was still technically in a foreign throne room, surrounded by armed soldiers. This is a very impressive room, he said instead. You are a terrible liar, Vera observed. Finish your sentence. He looked at her. Golden eyes, slow pulse of light along her jaw. The music built around them. You're the most extraordinary thing I've ever seen, he said. And I work with particle accelerators. This time she did smile. It was brief and controlled, and it rearranged something fundamental in Ethan's understanding of beauty. In the galleries above, the smile was not well received. General Caro's, 7 feet of decorated military steel, his silver skin carrying the dull sheen of old battle scars, watched the dance with his hands clasped behind his back and his jaw set like a locked gate. Beside him, his second-in-command, Commander Vesson, leaned close. He made her smile, Vesson said. I see that. No one has made her smile in public in 7 years. I know. Caro's golden eyes tracked Ethan with the focused attention of a predator assessing range. The creature is a weapon, whether it knows it or not. Whether she knows it or not. Across the gallery, in a box reserved for visiting clan nobility, a woman named Duchess Ravina watched with an expression carved from ice. She had spent 11 years positioning her niece for a royal marriage. 11 years of calculated gifts, strategic alliances, orchestrated appearances. And this pale, soft, clearly baffled mammal from some backward planet had walked in and undone it in a single sentence. Find out everything about him, she murmured to the attendant at her side. Everything. And then find out what he can be made to fear. The dance ended. Vera stepped back from Ethan with that same controlled stillness, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. Him out of breath from more than just the dancing, her composed, but for the fact that her golden markings were burning brighter than they had at any point in the ceremony. The advisor stepped forward, face a careful bureaucratic blank. By ancient law and witnessed ritual, the challenge has been made and accepted. The bonding ceremony will be performed at the next alignment of the twin moons, 14 days hence. He paused. The consort will require chambers, and instruction. He will have both, Vera said. Her gaze returned to Ethan. You have 14 days to decide if you wish to run. And if I do, then you will run, and I will not stop you, and we will call it a failed challenge, which has precedent in law. No one will pursue you, a beat, except the ones who were already planning to kill you before the dance. I cannot speak for them. Ethan absorbed this. So my choices are, potentially get killed running, or stay and marry the empress of an alien civilization. Those are approximately your choices. Great, said Ethan. Great. Yeah, okay. He ran a hand through his hair. Can I at least get a shower? I think I have capacitor residue on my neck. For the second time, Vera almost smiled. We do not have showers. We have immersion pools. She turned toward the dais. I will have someone show you. And Ethan Calloway. She said his name precisely, the way the translator had rendered it. You should know that no one in this court has spoken to me without calculation in longer than I can remember. He looked at her. Is that good or bad? I have not decided yet, she said. I find I am interested to find out. His chambers were extraordinary. A suite of rooms carved from dark stone, hung with fabrics that seemed to generate their own soft light, furnished with things that were approximately chair-shaped and approximately bed-shaped and surprisingly comfortable. His guide was a young aide named Tavi, small and quick, whose silver skin had a faint green undertone, and who seemed personally offended by how little Ethan knew about anything. You cannot call her by her name, Tavi said, holding up fingers to count his offenses. You cannot touch her without permission. You cannot enter her chambers unannounced. You cannot speak before she speaks in formal settings. You cannot eat before she eats at the same table. You cannot. How long is this list? I have been awake since the ceremony, and I have not finished writing it. Ethan sat on the edge of what was approximately a bed. Tavi, can I ask you something? You are going to anyway. Why did she accept? Really? She said I made a joke. She knew it was a joke, so why? Tavi was quiet for a moment, arranging courtesy items on a shelf with unnecessary precision. The Empress, Tavi said finally, has been at war for 9 years. She has been in negotiations or battle or ceremony every day for 9 years. She has not laughed. She has not made an unscheduled choice. She has not. Tavi paused. She has been very alone, in the particular way that powerful people become alone. And you walked in and spoke to her the way you might speak to anyone, like she was just someone, not an institution. Ethan was quiet. That has not happened, Tavi said softly, in a very long time. That night, lying in the dark of alien chambers while a red sky pressed against his window, Ethan Calloway made a list of his own. At the top of it he wrote, "Do not fall in love with the Empress." He already knew, with the weary clarity of a man who has always been bad at following his own advice, that he was going to cross it out. On the third day, someone tried to poison him. It was subtle. A compound dissolved in the mineral water that Tavi brought each morning, colorless, odorless to human senses, and apparently designed to mimic a cardiac event. Ethan only survived because Tavi, arriving early and finding the water already set out, which was not protocol, tasted a single drop on instinct and recognized the faint chemical signature of a restricted substance. Tavi reported it to the Empress's personal guard. By noon, Ethan was standing in a smaller, starker version of the throne room, while General Caros stood before Vera with the posture of a man who had made his peace with difficult conversations. "The investigation is ongoing," Caros said. "We cannot yet determine which faction." "The vial carried Duchy Ravina's perfumed compound on the glass," Vera said. Her voice was absolutely even. Her personal blending, distinct enough to identify. A silence. "Empress, I am not interested in the politics of it today, Caros." She looked at Ethan, who was standing slightly to the side, trying to appear less alarmed than he was. "Are you unwell?" "I didn't drink it," he said. "I'm okay." "Tavi will be recognized." Something shifted in her expression. "I am sorry. This is my court's failing. It's not your fault someone tried to. Everything that happens in my empire is my responsibility," she said. "That is the nature of the position." Her golden markings pulsed unevenly, the first sign of agitation he'd learned to read. "I will have a guard assigned to your rooms. You will not be alone outside your chambers. I don't want to be a prisoner. You are not." She held his gaze. "You are my—" A pause fractional, where the political terminology seemed to cost her something. "You are under my protection. It is different." Caros watched this exchange with eyes like filed metal. Later, he would send a message to Duchy Ravina. Try again with more care. And a second message to a different ally. The human has the Empress speaking in the first person. Consider whether he lives or dies more dangerous to our interests. On the 7th day, Vera came to find him herself. It was unexpected enough that the guard outside his chamber nearly had a crisis of protocol. Ethan was in the middle of attempting to sketch the architectural geometry of the corridor from memory, a habit from his engineering days, when she appeared in his doorway, out of full armor for the first time, in something simpler and darker, the golden markings on her collarbone and arms unhidden. "You draw," she said, observing the sketches spread across the table. "I'm an engineer. I think in structures." He set down the stylus. "I didn't expect you. I did not expect to come." She moved into the room slowly, looking at the sketches. "These are accurate. You have a precise eye. Helps to survive on Earth too, knowing when things are unstable. She picked up one sketch. The throne room rendered in careful geometry, proportion measured by guesswork and visual memory. She studied it with an expression he was learning to recognize as genuine interest, wearing its careful mask. "Sit with me?" he asked. "If that's allowed." "Many things are not allowed," she said, and sat beside him at the table. Close enough that the warmth of her was tangible. The golden markings on her arm, near his, were burning quietly in the dim light. "Tell me about where you come from. Your world," he told her. He told her about Earth in the way you describe something you love without knowing it. The specific blue of afternoon sky before rain, the smell of old books, the precise sound that a city makes at 3 in the morning when it is mostly asleep, the way certain music could open a door in your chest you didn't know was there. He told her about his work, about the thrill of understanding how weight and force and geometry could conspire to make impossible things stand. He told her about his family, a mother who gardened, a father who was better at building things than saying them. She listened the way a scholar listens, completely, with the whole self. "You miss it," she said, "every day." "But it's," he considered, "less lately. Does that make sense? Like it's still there. I still love it, but there's something here that's—" He stopped. "You don't have to manage your words with me," she said quietly. "I asked because I wanted to know, not because the answer must be diplomatic." He looked at her. In the low light of his chambers, her eclipse eyes had softened. The golden lines on her throat moved with her breath. "There's something here," he said, "that I didn't know I was missing." A long silence. "Not empty, full. I have been the Empress since I was 19, she said. "My mother died in battle. My father 2 years before that. I have had advisors and generals and court members and rivals for 15 years, and not one of them—" She stopped herself. "Not one of them what?" "Looked at me," she said, very precisely. "The way you look at me. How do I look at you? Like I am a person." The golden light along her jaw pulsed. "Not a throne. Not a symbol. A person." He reached across the table slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and laid his hand over hers. She looked down at it, then looked up at him. "Is this allowed?" he asked softly. "No," she said, and did not move her hand. They stayed like that for a long time, in the quiet of his chambers, while the red Salanthi sky darkened outside the window, and somewhere in the corridors, forces were moving against both of them, and neither of them spoke about it, because this moment was outside of all of that, and they both knew it, and they were both, for different reasons, desperate for something that existed outside. On the 9th night, she kissed him. It was not planned. They had been in the archive. She had taken him there herself, personally, to show him the star charts, the ancient mapped routes of Salanthi expansion, because he had asked about them with the bright-eyed curiosity of someone who had never learned to hide how interesting he found things. She had been explaining the symbol for a binary star system when their hands reached for the same point on the chart simultaneously. They both went still. Her hand was over his. His face was close to hers, turned toward her. The archive smelled of mineral dust, and something that functioned as old paper in this world. "Vera," he said, testing the sound of her name. "You are not supposed to call me that." "I know." She turned her face the remaining fraction of an inch and kissed him with the deliberate precision of someone who had made a decision and intended to keep it. It lasted longer than a decision. It became something else, a mutual gravitational pull, a give and take of warmth and breath. His free hand rising to the curve of her jaw where the golden lines pulsed against his fingertips like a second heartbeat. She made a sound against his mouth that she would never have permitted in the throne room. Something small and surrendered. When they separated, her markings were blazing. "That," she said, composing herself with visible effort, "was also not allowed. I noticed you doing it anyway." "Yes." She looked at him with those eclipse eyes. There is a great deal I have been doing anyway, since you arrived. I am trying to decide if that is a weakness, or evidence, she said, that some rules are worth reconsidering. On the 11th day, they came for him in force. It was not subtle this time. Duchess Ravenna, understanding that the bonding ceremony was 3 days away and that the window was closing, had made an alliance with General Caros, not ideologically, but transactionally. Caros believed the human was a liability. Ravenna needed the marriage stopped. They did not trust each other, but they had a shared object. The attack came at the 2nd hour of night, when the guard rotation had a 7-minute gap that Caros knew about because he had designed it. Ethan was awake. He'd been awake for hours, actually, sitting with his engineering habit of mapping escape routes and structural weaknesses in any space he inhabited. He had mapped his chambers 6 days ago. He knew which wall abutted a service corridor, and he knew that the service corridor led to the Empress's wing. Not her private chambers, but close. When the door opened and 3 figures came through in tactical silence, Ethan was already not where they expected him to be. What followed was not a heroic fight. Ethan was not a fighter. He was a structural engineer with a talent for understanding how force moved through systems, and he was very good at being somewhere unexpected. He used a corner. He used a lamp equivalent that was heavier than it looked. He used the 7 minutes. He ran. He made it to the service corridor and through it, and into the outer hall of the Empress's wing before the alarm raised. Not because of him, but because Tavi, who apparently never slept, had seen the tactical unit enter the building and had already sent the alert. The hall filled with the Empress's personal guard within 90 seconds. Vera herself appeared 30 seconds after that. She was in battle armor, the full ceremonial war armor, and it transformed her in a way that took Ethan's breath even through the adrenaline. She was every inch the flamekeeper of the Vorkai. Her golden markings burned like the outlines of a weapon. She looked at him, standing in the hallway, out of breath, a cut on his cheekbone from a wall corner, his hair a disaster. And something moved through her face that was past composure into something raw. "You're alive," she said. "Currently." He pressed his hand to the cut. "Your general, Caros. He was part of it. The gaps in the guard rotation, I know." Her voice was stone. "I have known for 2 days. I was building the evidence." Her gaze moved to the guards. "Secure the corridors. Find Caros and Ravenna. Bring them to the council hall." She looked back at Ethan. "Come with me." "Where?" "Somewhere safe." A pause. "My chambers." The raised eyebrow of every guard in earshot was technically controlled, but visible. "That," Ethan said, following her, "is definitely not allowed." "No," Vera said. "It is not." Her chambers were not what he expected. He had expected something severe. All dark stone and military order. Instead, they were unexpectedly full of things. Maps pinned to curved walls. Objects from 100 different worlds. Gifts, he supposed, or trophies, but arranged like curiosities rather than conquests. Books, or the Salanthi equivalent. A wide window that looked out over the Empire's capital city. A sprawl of blue-lit towers against a night sky scattered with the light of unfamiliar constellations. She led him to the window seat, which was wide enough for 2, and looked at the cut on his face without touching it. "I should have moved faster," she said. "You couldn't have known exactly when." "I should have moved faster," she repeated. Her voice had changed, stripped of the formal register, down to something personal and unguarded. "If you had..." She stopped. The golden markings flickered unevenly. "Hey!" He reached for her hand, the way he had 7 nights ago in his own chambers. She let him take it. "I'm here." "Yes." She looked at him steadily. "Ethan, I need to tell you something." "Okay." "When you made your joke in the throne room, I knew it was a joke." He was quiet. "I recognized your fear. I recognized the humor as armor. I have used the same defense. Her thumb moved across the back of his hand. I accepted anyway. Why? He asked. Softly. Because, she said. In 15 years of ruling, no one had ever been afraid of me and chosen to be kind anyway. You were terrified, and you made a joke to take the edge off. Not for yourself. For the room. To make the moment smaller and less terrible. She paused. I have been in rooms for 15 years where fear makes people cruel. Or strategic. Or very still. You made it funny. He looked at her. And I thought, she collected herself. I thought that whatever kind of person does that, whatever kind of person finds the warmth in a frightening moment, I wanted to know what it was like to be near that person for longer than a moment. Outside, the twin moons of the Salanthi Empire were rising, 2 days early by his count. The alignment was ahead of schedule. Vera, he said, you are not supposed to. I know. Vera. He said her name again, deliberately. I didn't ask for any of this. I wasn't trying to be anything. I was just terrified and defaulted to myself. I know, she said. That is the point. He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to the back of it, where the golden lines ran across her knuckles. She made a small sound and looked at him with those eclipse eyes so close now that he could see the individual threads of gold in the dark. The ceremony is in 2 days, she said. I know. You could still leave. The law allows for. Vera. He pulled her closer, and she came without resistance, which for her was its own kind of statement. I'm not leaving. She touched his face with her free hand, carefully, as though learning the shape of him in the dark. You are a very strange being, she said, from a very distant world. You are the most extraordinary person I've ever met, he said. And I've met a particle accelerator. This time she laughed. A real one, brief and startled and incandescent. He fell completely, irreversibly in love with her in that moment. Not the falling that feels like terror. The falling that feels like recognizing something you've been missing. They stayed in the window seat all night, talking about everything. His world, her wars, her exhaustion with them, his ideas about structures and how weight could be distributed differently, her ideas about empire and whether it had to mean what it had always meant. Outside the window, the capital glowed blue, and the twin moons climbed, and somewhere in the palace, Kairos and Ravina were being escorted to the council hall, and the world was continuing to be complex and dangerous. But inside, for those hours, there was only this. The bonding ceremony of Empress Vera Salanthis and Ethan Calloway of Earth took place under the alignment of 2 moons, with the full court assembled, the Empire watching via the communication channels that broadcast from the capital spire, and one very flustered structural engineer standing at the center of it all in ceremonial Salanthi robes that Tavi had spent 3 days adjusting to fit a human frame. The robes were extraordinary. Dark as deep space, traced with gold at the edges, cut to suggest armor without being armored. Ethan had looked at himself in the reflection surface and thought, my grandmother would have opinions. He thought of her often lately. She who had made him practice the bow, practice the courtesy, practice the idea that dignity was something you carried in your spine regardless of circumstance. He thought she might, against all odds, understand this. The council hall had convened 2 days prior. Kairos had not denied his involvement. Salanthi law gave no advantage to false confession but valued honest accounting, and the general had enough of the old code in him to stand straight and say what he'd done and why. He believed the human was a destabilizing influence. He believed the Empress's judgment had been compromised. My judgment, Vera had said from the head of the council table, has been clearer in the past 14 days than in the 9 years prior. That is not compromise. That is correction. Kairos had been stripped of his general's insignia and remanded to a border post far from the capital. Ravina had been returned to her duchy with a formal censure, and the quiet understanding that her niece's prospects at court were permanently concluded. The factions had gone quiet. Not convinced, Ethan knew better, but watching, waiting to see if the human could become something that fit into their world. He intended to try. The ceremony itself was long, and Tavi had prepared him for all of it. The spoken vows in Old Salanthi that he had practiced phonetically until he could produce them without the translator's help. The ritual exchange of bioluminescent dye that was pressed to his wrist by the officiating elder, and to Vera's, the color spreading across both their skin in identical patterns, a temporary mark of binding that would fade in a year and could be renewed or not by mutual choice. He felt the dye settle warm on his wrist and looked up at her. She stood across from him in her full ceremonial armor, golden markings burning bright, eclipse eyes steady. She had come to him the night before, quietly, slipping through a side door that apparently existed between their chambers that he had not been told about. And they had sat again in the window of her room, and she had rested her head against his shoulder. And they had watched the twin moons without speaking until she had fallen asleep, and he had let her sleep, sitting there with her warm against him in the alien dark. He had never felt more like himself than in that silence. "Now," the elder said, and Vera turned to face him fully, and he met her gaze, and the 10,000 people in the room seemed to exist at a great distance. She spoke the vow in Old Salanthi. He knew enough now to follow the meaning without the translator. Something about fire and constancy. About choosing the difficult thing over the safe one. About keeping faith with a person rather than a position. His turn. He had prepared what Tavi had written for him. But standing here, looking at her, he chose instead what he actually meant. He said it first in Old Salanthi, approximate and accented, and watched her eyes widen slightly at the improvisation. Then he said it again in English, for himself, he supposed, or for the record, or because some things needed to be said in your native tongue to be fully real. "I came here by accident," he said. "I was afraid, and I made a joke, because that's what I do when the universe stops making sense. I didn't mean to challenge you. I didn't know what I was doing." He paused. "But I knew what I was feeling when you stood up. And I knew what I was feeling when you danced with me. And I have known every day since what I feel, which is that wherever you are is somewhere I want to be. I'm an engineer. I understand weight and force and how things are built to last. I intend to understand you, for as long as you'll allow it." The translator gave the court a version. He watched it move through the room like a wave. Some confusion, some calculation, and in the section where Tavi stood, a brief, visible effort to contain emotion. Vera was looking at him with something he had no name for yet, but would spend years learning. She completed the ceremony. When it was done, when the elder struck the ceremonial chord and the crowd's bioluminescent markings blazed in unison, a wave of light moving through 10,000 bodies like a single held breath released. She stepped toward him, and he went to her, and she put her hand against his face and kissed him in front of the full court of the Salanthi Empire. And the sound the crowd made was the resonant chest music, louder than he'd ever heard it, rising and rising until the hall rang with it. That evening, after the court had processed and the formal dinner had concluded and the last of the ceremony had wound itself down, Ethan and Vera sat together on the balcony of her chambers. Their chambers now, though he was still adjusting to the pronoun. Watching the twin moons in full alignment overhead. She was out of armor. In something simpler, her golden markings the low, steady pulse of someone at rest. His ceremonial robes were replaced with what Tavi called casual wear, roughly analogous to linen trousers and a loose shirt, both unexpectedly comfortable. Her legs were across his lap. His hand rested at her ankle. They had been talking for an hour about nothing in particular. The engineering of the capital's water system, which Ethan had opinions about, and the political history of the Third Moon Colony, which she had nuanced feelings about, and had lapsed into comfortable quiet. "I need to tell you something," he said. "You say that when you are about to say the true version of something you almost said earlier." She turned her head toward him. "I have noticed." He smiled. "Yeah, okay." He looked at the moons. I don't know how to get home. I don't know if I can. The experiment that brought me here. I don't have the equipment or the data to replicate it. I may be. He stopped. I may be here permanently. I know, she said. You know, my engineers have been analyzing the anomaly since the day you arrived. They believe the resonance event that transported you was unique, a specific intersection of your technology, and a Salanthi deep space pulse we were testing simultaneously. The probability of replicating it is, she paused, very low. And you still went through with the ceremony. I told you from the beginning you could leave. I meant it each time. She held his gaze. I also hoped each time that you would choose to stay. He looked at her for a long moment. I'm not sad, he said. I should be. I know that's strange. But Vera, I'm not sad. No, I miss my mother's garden. I miss the sound of rain. I miss coffee badly. Tavi's been trying to find a local equivalent, and it's going terribly. But, he touched the dye mark on his wrist, the pattern that matched hers. This feels like somewhere I'm supposed to be. I can't explain that. I'm an engineer. I'm not supposed to be mystical about things. Perhaps, she said. Some structures are built by forces we do not fully understand, and we understand their purpose only once we are standing inside them. He stared at her. Did you just explain my feelings using structural metaphor? You are not the only one who has been paying attention. He laughed, a real laugh, helpless and warm. She watched him laugh with that expression he had learned by now. The one that meant she was filing this away. This particular version of him, to keep. He pulled her closer. She settled against him with the ease of something long practiced. Though it had been 2 weeks, some things he was learning did not require time to feel true. Vera, he said into her hair. What happens now? She was quiet a moment, looking at the aligned moons, at the lit city below, at the empire that was hers and now, in whatever form was real and possible, in some measure his. Now, she said, you learn everything. The language, the law, the history, the customs you will inevitably keep violating, and the ones worth challenging. The factions that will try to use you, and the allies who will be worth cultivating. You will make many mistakes, and I will correct you without witnesses when I can, and with precision when I cannot. That sounds like a lot of work. It is. A pause. I will make mistakes too. I will default to the formal register when I am frightened. I will cancel plans without explanation when the Empire demands it. I will be, as I have always been, better at governing than at being known. I'm good at the second one, he said. We can work with that. She lifted her head to look at him. You are very strange, she said softly, from a very distant world. He pressed a kiss to her temple. She closed her eyes. You said that already. I intend to keep saying it. She settled back against him. I find it is one of my favorite things about you. Below the balcony, the capital city burned with blue light, and the Empire breathed, and the twin moons watched over all of it. 2 separate bodies that had been circling each other for 1,000,000 years, close enough to light each other's surface, far enough to remain individually whole. Ethan thought, I am a structural engineer. I understand weight and force, and the geometry of things that are built to last. I think this lasts.